Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Human Services Committee meeting. This is Monday, May 2nd, 2016. It is about 6:02. We have a quorum. And the first item on our agenda is approval of meeting minutes of March 7th, 2016. Is there a motion to approve?
Second.
Are there any changes or corrections? Okay, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay. So we're moving on to items for consideration. Good, Alderman Tendam is here, great. We have some folks that are signed up.
That's from Ann, so you might want to let people know that, the
Okay.
problems with the TV.
Oh, all right, so,
It's being shown that this meeting is being on the District 65 and District 2.
okay, apparently there's a problem with the TV, and so this meeting is being shown on the District 65, and District 65 is on the city channel. Marty, did you hear that? Oh, the cable guy went in?
Yeah.
So apparently, we're having a problem with our meeting showing up on the city, the District 65 channel.
I will go check.
Yeah, Alderman
Okay.
Rainey just texted in.
Yeah. Say hi to Alderman Rainey. Hi, Ann. Okay. We have a number of folks that have signed up to speak. I think we'll go ahead and take citizen comment right now.
Take my pen. I said, did she take my pen?
I don't have your pen.
No.
I-
asked her,
oh.
did she take my
Okay. We'll get settled up here, folks. A little disorganized here. So we have some folks that are signed up both on the dog beach, on bees, and on the food truck ordinance, and then another unstated subject. So we'll go ahead and, John, you've signed up, but your presentation is later. And so Willis Silverthorne is going to speak on the bees. And then we have Jeffrey, is it Pal or Pay? Pal or Pay? And then Nancy Schwartz.
Well, Nancy and Mickey are my neighbors, and this issue kind of came up relative to our proximity and having a bee colony there. And I just kind of wanted to clear up a couple of things that happened relative to this, because I believe what's kind of coming up here is very dangerous to possibly eliminating beekeeping in Evanston.
Are you the beekeeper?
I am the beekeeper.
Okay.
And my neighbors and I have had several conversations, and we had actually a mediation where we came up with what I thought was a very good plan. We were going to do a 1 month with the bee colony present and 2 months without, to see how that would go. We had an 8-month period where we had the bees present, and there was nobody ever got stung. Bees were never a problem, and there were very few bees, I believe, in their yard. Now, Nancy has a genuine fear for the bees, but I believe it's simply a fear. There's no real nuisance here. There's no bees that are really in their yard, and I was constantly trying to prove it to them. We've had several discussions even today, and we're still trying to sort all that out. But having said all that, I verbally agreed with them to not have the bees there. I moved this bee colony before this issue ever came up. The bees have not been in the yard for over 3 months, and still we're here for some reason. There's very few bee colonies in Evanston, and if we move forward with a restriction for people to start a beehive, I'm pretty certain that it'll be like other townships that do the same, and we will not have an urban beekeeping presence at all. And this township is a leader, and people follow it. And if people do this, I think it's a real danger to losing honeybees in our neighborhoods. Now, I had my best year of gardening last year with the bees present. I had all these tomatoes and peppers and all the vegetables I did. We do millions of dollars of that here in Evanston. There's literally thousands of people that are doing urban gardens, and just a few beehives is a big part of having that work and be successful. It's a major influence on the commerce here in this city. And beyond that, the actual nuisance that is supposedly being brought up is, again, it never was. Because of the fear my neighbors have, and I don't believe it's justified, but it's irrelevant, I feel like I had to do something to make sure that they were okay with me doing it. So I said, until I can convince you that I can bring the bees here, I've gone way out of my way to move my bee colony into Wisconsin. And it's a 50-minute drive, and it costs that much time, money, and effort to keep these bees. And I just think it's just really unfortunate we've come to this point here. And
I do need you to wrap up.
yeah, well, again, I have a verbal agreement with these people. There's no other issue that's ever come up with you guys. You've had no other people bring this issue up. And I believe neighbors should be able to work these things out. And that's what we've done. That's what we've actually done here. And that's what I believe people should do. And if you guys move forward with this other ordinance, we are going to lose beekeeping in Evanston.
Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, Jeffrey, I don't know whether it's Pay or Pal. Are you here? No. Nancy Schwartz, are you here? And for everyone who's speaking, if you could try to keep it to 3 minutes, that would be great.
Hi, I'm Nancy Schwartz, and as you know, I have spoken before about my situation, and it is strictly a medical concern with my lupus, the reaction with the bee stings, etc. We've gone over that before, and just in response to one thing, with my neighbor, we did not have a verbal agreement. It was something that was not agreed to. And under the circumstances, I can't, because again, for me, this is a medical issue. And really all I wanted to say was I appreciate the fact that you have all taken this into consideration. You've worked on it. And for me, it means a great deal. And I know that Alderman Holmes has somebody who has lupus and understands the situation. So this is not fear for fear itself of a bee. This is because it's a life and death situation for me. So thank you. Again, thank you for all that you have done thus far. Very much appreciated.
My understanding from what Mr. Silverthorne said was that the bees are no longer on his property. Is that correct?
The beehive was removed a couple of months ago.
3 months ago.
Because there was a concern with the weather and the fluctuations and whether or not they would survive.
Okay.
But at the moment, there is no hive.
Okay.
However, that, again.
Okay. Wait. Okay.
Yeah.
Wait. We're not gonna have an argument here.
No,
I just
wanted to thank you.
Yeah, we're just
That's
trying
all.
to clear up the facts. Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Nat Davis, are you here?
Just quickly, we did have an agreement, but the agreement the agreement we had is that I would not have a beehive present if they will not agree with it. And that's why I moved the hive. I moved the hive until we could feel better about our situation. And I feel that neighbors should be able to work these things out. If you guys restrict us, we're not going to have bees.
That's fine. That's fine. We hear you.
But that's the truth, and I think Nancy might have, there was a misunderstanding.
We don't want the argument here. Nat Davis.
Hi, I'm Nat Davis. I am a possible food truck vendor. So I don't really know where you are in your discussions for the food trucks.
Right.
But to me, I would like to be able to come into Chicago, into Evanston and set up a business as a small business owner without having a brick and mortar supporter. So please think about it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Matt Rogers. Matt, and then Madeline Dupree, and then Michael Schwartz.
Good evening, Chairman Fisk, members of the council. My name is Matt Rogers. I live at 133 Clyde Avenue. I'm also chairman of the Zoning Board of Appeals for the City of Evanston for at least 6 more weeks.
He's counting, though.
I'm counting. It's been 10 years. Evanston, with its commitment to ecology, the environmental principles that have been adopted through various city plans, and the steps that it has taken to lessen human footprint on the planet all contribute to the fact that, in my opinion, Evanston should be leading the way in urban beekeeping. And generally, I view this as a land use issue, not unlike many of the special uses which come before the Zoning Board of Appeals and then are heard by the council. Just as restaurants, breweries, and other businesses generate noise, noxious odors in some case, we know that things do have impacts on neighbors. We've had several cases in which people with COPD or asthma have appeared before us to complain about potential smoke, fumes, etc., from neighboring properties. The biggest issue I have with the ordinance that's been proposed is the ability for a neighbor to veto it by doing nothing. Special uses do not give the neighbors veto authority. Once something is granted a special use, it is allowed to operate. There are other measures for ensuring that it complies within the ordinance as it's set out, through inspection, through licensing, things like that. Many of the problems that could become apparent could have nothing to do with beekeeping. We on ZBA often have had neighbors show up who are complaining about someone's air conditioning condenser, but when you delve a little deeper, you can discover that it's really because someone's dog keeps going on someone else's property. The other issue is that a significant number of neighbors could be involved in the ability to grant permission. For example, in an R5 in which I live, I would need the annual approval of potentially 80 people in order for me to operate a beehive. And if any one of those 80 people did not consent, that would not allow me to do that. And the fact that any of the issues that are raised again could be addressed through the annual licensing. There is a significant amount of time and money that is invested by an apiarist, that's a hard word to say, and I think that should be considered. Just like the City Council has granted hen coops, which are allowed to be kept and are allowed a one-time screening and then licensing is what regulates them, I believe beehives should be treated similarly. And I am fine with many of the other changes that are included in this ordinance, but I am not in support of the neighbor veto authority. I also do not believe that it should be applied retroactively, and that once a hive is established, it should be allowed to operate in perpetuity unless there are violations and citations. Thank you.
Madeline?
Hello, everyone.
Good evening.
My name is Madeline Dupree. I just want to say, in my opinion, the Human Services is one of the most important committees here in Evanston, I believe, because we can deal with human beings face to face, and hopefully this committee will help to solve some of those issues. I would like to speak on a couple of subjects, but since there's only 3 minutes, I think I better just stick with the politics side of things here tonight. I would like also to speak a little bit about the health issues, and maybe I would mention the health issues first. I would like this committee to find out about the Planned Parenthood here in Evanston on abortion, the data that is given, because I have some disturbing research that I have done. I would like to see if it could be broken down and how that is handled here in Evanston as far as abortion, Planned Parenthood, and what are we planning to do to make Planned Parenthood better for many people. I would like also to mention about the politics here in Evanston. And we need only to look at our governor to find out how politics works sometimes for many of us, and many of us low-income people. We also need to learn about the highest government. We need only to look at the current president to find out who runs the show most of the times, and how Congress stalled many things that we could have been doing differently in our country that trickles down to Evanston. I am happy to hear that the mayor have put forth some effort from Evanston to send to that highest government. It makes a difference. I have mentioned that many times at this council. And if we don't, then we don't put our voice where it should be, and it can be counted. I'm going to finish talking about the daycare here in Evanston and how that affects our children, how the quality of safety we need for our children here. Head Start program, we talk about reading with our children. This happens here at the Human Services too, not only the Human Services in the other schools that make a difference if we work together. And I would like also, in ending, that I spoke at the city council meeting, and I was wondering if there's any facts on those issues that I spoke about with the young man on Asbury with the shooting of the policeman. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now Michael Schwartz, and then I can't read the next name. I think the last name is Pally? Oh. And then Judith Jacobs.
Thank you very much for listening to both sides of this issue about bees. I think it boils down to a matter of safety for the people who can be affected by a bee sting. I don't have the eloquence or the knowledge of some of the others who do speak, but I can speak to the danger that a bee sting can pose to an individual. And I think that's what we need to be concerned about, is what can happen, not just to my wife, but to anybody else in Evanston who may not be aware of what we're talking about or what these proceedings are about, that somebody could be affected. I spoke last time that it could be any of your friends, relatives, or neighbors, and they should be able to have some input into whether they want to be in that position. And that's what we're seeking and what we have sought, in which your department has proposed. And that's what we would like to see happen on that. We know it's important. There are places in Evanston, like plots are rented out to people who want to farm. There's available land here where if beekeepers want to keep bees, they can keep them the way people do gardens plots in the same way. The west side of James Park, for instance, there's rarely anybody over there. Isn't this something that the city could look into and possibly setting aside a site like that for beekeepers to keep bees and to try and promote bees without endangering necessarily the neighbor next door? Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much.
Hi, Larry McMahon from 531 Judson, talking about the dog beach. Being very brief, this is actually to be our dog's last summer to be at the beach. She's not going to be around for the next year. Okay, I realize Mother Nature kind of wiped out the beach, but I need an alternative, and you went soon. Whether that's to go to Wilmette, dog beach there, or wherever. So my only ask is, let me know what I can do soon. It's our last summer. Thank you.
Yep, absolutely. Judith Jacobs. Oh, there you are. You changed.
I recognize myself. Oh, I'm sorry. Hi, I'm, pardon me, a neighbor of the beekeeper who spoke before. And essentially, we were delighted last year to have all of those little visitors. And I looked it up quickly because I am allergic to wasps and mud daubers and all those other creepy things, and found that, in fact, honeybees do not bite. The vegetation that we had was absolutely wonderful. My dog thought he had a gazillion new friends, and I'm delighted by them, but I'm dismayed by the possibility that our freedoms are being more and more limited, and that there is an ordinance on the books now. And as I understand it, and I commiserate with Nancy, that if there is a health issue from a stinging insect that are kept, then it's a situation. But if, in fact, the insects, the honeybees, are not stinging, then I'm just not really sure about what's going on. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Leslie Shad. Oh,
Not saying anything.
Oh.
I left my pen here.
obviously, I've intimidated everyone. That's terrible. The fear of the chair.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you. I'm Leslie Shad. I'm involved in organizing Natural Habitat Evanston, which is working with the city and community to create habitat for pollinators and for birds in Evanston, and we're trying to certify the city of Evanston as a community habitat for pollinators and birds. So I just want to be sort of clear that, I have all respect for people who have allergies and concerns, and I am a beekeeper in Indiana. But I don't believe this is a question of allergies. I think this is, in reality, the regulations do protect health. And, when new renters move in or new homeowners move in, they're exposed to the same thing, and this is only an annual renewal. So in reality, there's a disconnect there in any case. And also, our nuisance regulations, in fact, protect health. You'd have, what would normally happen if you do have, I realize this didn't happen in this situation. This is a single instance that was a bit of a breakdown. But and normally, you'd give notice that the bees have to move, and the beekeeper would either move them, or what just comes in, you put soapy water on the bee. You open the hive, or get a beekeeper open the hive, you put soapy water in. It is incredibly easy to kill bees. That's the part of the problem. Okay, so and I just want to mention, I have a lot of respect for the staff, but I had some reservations about the memo, and the only one I want to mention is it said that it is common best practice for urban beekeeping to request these written approvals. So I looked at the ordinances of New York City, Los Angeles, which was passed only in October of last year after intense review and debate, Chicago, San Diego, and Des Moines. Not a single one requires any approval of neighbors, whether it's written or oral. And Skokie, I believe, is the one we're thinking about. And Skokie, in fact, does not require neighbor consents on renewals. And that's probably because it's very disruptive and difficult to move your hive after you have established it. So I just want to mention that. I think the question for the city should be what the vision for the city is. Evanston is trying to encourage pollinators. We're trying to grow local food and small business around local food. There's also, we're talking about economic opportunity, and having local honey in the 5th Ward would not be a terrible idea. The Chicago beekeeping ordinance says that urban agriculture talking about beekeeping, provides a proven tool for improving the city's quality of life. So anyway, the question is how best to educate people. If people are asked to provide written approval about bees before they've even lived with them, people don't like bugs, bees are scary, honeybees look like yellow jackets, and they just won't approve it. And one person in an urban environment, there are urban beekeeping in these big cities, having one person not approve is problematic. Already there's a chill on beekeeping in Evanston. I don't do this here because people use too many pesticides. They don't like bugs. My neighbors might approve it, but who knows what they would, opinions change, so it's difficult. So I don't do it here. But I think you need to be encouraging more people to keep bees in Evanston. Another issues are pesticides actually here. So anyway, I think that's the end of me. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Is there anyone who didn't sign up who wishes to speak? Yes, Ms. Janes. If you could come and sign in for us, please.
I did change my mind too.
Okay.
This is just really short. I don't know when the Lake Michigan water level update is going during that time whether the audience will have a chance to ask questions. But if we don't have a chance to ask questions, I would ask someone on the committee if they would just ask, what would the effect on the shoreline be if the breakwaters were removed? That's it.
Okay. Thank you. Martha?
Thank you.
I'll sign it.
Martha Rudy. I just was asked to come tonight by my colleagues on the First Night Evanston board regarding the food truck ordinance, and just to encourage all of you to make it as friendly as possible. The fee, we've tried to have food trucks on New Year's Eve the last few years, and the fee has posed an issue with some of the food trucks because they, by the time they pay the fee, pay their staff, they have to do a certain amount of business, which depending, if it's weather dependent, sometimes they don't have the exact crowds, but then the people who are looking for food don't have it. So we'd really like to have the most friendly policy as possible. And that's just our New Year's Eve wish. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Martha. And we're ending public comment there. So the items for consideration, the first one is HH1, the police complaints reviews. Staff recommends acceptance of the Evanston Police Department complaint reviews from March 2016. Is there a motion to approve?
Move approval. Second.
Okay, is there any discussion? Oh, Alderman Miller.
Commander Davis isn't here. Sergeant, you're taking over. So I know this is your first,
Good evening, Madam Chair and committee members. Alderman Miller.
I have a couple questions regarding, this is the first DI number 15-18. I don't know if you can answer it, and if you can't, can you just get back to us at the next meeting regarding these questions I have, if that would be appreciated.
Sure.
So my first question is, okay, so the individual in the complaint said that, or actually says here, the accused officer, one, discovered that a vehicle he detained for 2 minor traffic violations. Do you know what those violations were?
No, not right offhand, but I can research that for you.
That'd be great. And then also with that, what precipitated the search? It says here, contained a felony amount of cannabis. So I don't understand how we went from 2 minor traffic instances to a search that found cannabis in that regard. I don't know if you have information on that by any chance.
No, I don't want to speak from memory.
Okay, sure.
So what I'll do is I'll research it and I'll get that information back to you.
Okay. And then in terms of felony amount of cannabis, I mean, my understanding is under state law that's 10 grams or more.
No, that'll be 30 grams or more.
30 grams or more.
Yes.
Okay. Because under our ordinance, we have 10 grams or more. I'm just wondering in regards to, again, it says felony amount. I think our ordinance is not vague in the sense, but we allow discretion to have citations for more than 10, but those citations have to go to, they're not heard in our administrative hearings department, they're actually heard in Skokie. So I'm wondering what's the upper limit of how we enforce that 10 grams or more distinction? Because again, I want to give some discretion to officers for to enforce other crimes, for example. So, if a gun was found at the same time, much like we've seen recently in the news, to bring a more serious charge for cannabis in relation to that gun is appropriate in my mind and within discretion. But to actually have a traffic stop lead to felony arrest is troubling in my mind as well. So if you can get that back to me, we can, next meeting, that'd be great, or send it to me before, I'd appreciate that.
Sure, and just to clarify, you want to know the traffic violations, the 2 traffic violations, and also what precipitated
the search.
The search.
And then also just, you can send it to me privately, how much was the amount of cannabis actually found in this circumstance?
Sure will.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're right. It should be sent to the entire committee.
Okay.
Thanks, Sergeant.
All right.
Welcome aboard.
Okay, any other comments?
I do. I have a question.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
Sergeant? That's all right. Thank you, sir. Just a follow-up to Alderman Miller's question. I had requested at the last meeting when you gave the cannabis citation report that the report be I'd like to receive a copy or send it to the committee, broken down by race, age, and also ward.
Right.
Okay, so I haven't seen that yet.
I forwarded a copy last week, Monday, I believe.
To?
Yes, I forwarded to the committee last week, Monday.
Okay.
We apologize.
I'll re-forward it. I'll re-forward it this evening.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay, no other comments then? Okay, we've got a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion passes. Moving on to HH2, which is Ordinance 46016, amending the City Code Title 9, Chapter 4, Sections 19 and 20, beekeeping, to include a requirement for notice and consent from adjacent neighbors. It's the recommendation for all persons or entities that are residential landowners, residential renters, or business owners and/or business occupants with properties that share property lines with the property for which the applicant seeks the beekeeping license to give written consent, and that's for action. Is there a motion?
Move approval.
Is there?
For discussion.
Okay. Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Alderman Miller.
So again, I thought a lot about this, and with all respect to the Schwartzes, I think the process that is proposed here just isn't conducive to actually keeping beekeeping in Evanston. I actually agree with what Mr. Rogers said in the sense of this kind of lets one resident to either veto outright or actually by veto by ignoring the need to fill out this form. I would rather have us, so my understanding, Director Thomas White, is we only have 2 hives in Evanston currently, is that correct?
We currently have 5 in Evanston.
Okay. And how long have those been in existence, give or take?
Since 2006. I think the ordinance was dated 2006.
We received 2 new applicants, 2016. We already had 2 licensed prior, and we have 1 waiting to confirm.
Okay.
And we had no idea when those others in the beginning, before 206, were here, because there were beekeeping before we passed an ordinance.
I'd rather treat this like a permit in a sense, and actually have any application for beekeeping come before the council or the Human Services Committee for approval, rather than giving citizens kind of the veto authority over whether they agree with this or not. And I think it could be both positive in the sense that they disagree with it, or negative in just that they don't actually fill out the form. And we could have a process in place where we could hear from any objections to the permits, much like we do with zoning variations, et cetera. And I don't think that it will be overly burdensome on us, given that we've had 6 in 10 years. So I don't know if we want to refer it back to staff in that regard. I don't know if I have the support for that on the council, but I'd like to discuss that option instead of having residents have the sole authority to decide whether a hive will be established or not.
Okay. Alderman Holmes, then Alderman Tandem.
I would, because it come up several times this afternoon in terms of the speakers, has anyone ever requested or asked the city about having an area for beekeeping? And I'm asked that because when the gentleman says he has to go all the way to Wisconsin, and then the ladies in Indiana, we certainly have a lot of space along, I would think, along the canal, areas like that could very well be conducive to beekeeping. Has anybody ever made such a request? Because I think that there could be alternatives to this happening. I'm not so sure, and I'm not allergic, but I don't know if I want bees next to my house or not. I'm just not. So I would certainly, as a resident, tax-paying, just like they are, would want to have some input. But at the same time, I don't want to stop anyone from doing that. So I think that we have a responsibility to look at other options, and that's certainly, I believe he suggested that there, James Park, places where we have the gardening, and along Twiggs Park, over in there, there's lots of space, and actually from Green Bay Road all the way up to Church, there's all kinds of space that might be. Nobody's ever asked, I don't think. I've never heard of it before, but it's certainly something I think that we could look at. And if we're going to send it, if we send it back to staff, And I think if we do that, we certainly have to come back next month with something because it'll be that time to start doing it. That would be one of the things that I'd like to see included.
I think that's a great idea.
Alderman Tenta?
Thank you. I don't support the neighbor sort of veto process, but I do think what Mr. Schwartz did say about, and what Alderman Holmes just spoke to, I think that's a real great idea, regardless of what our ordinance has to say about neighborhood approval, because from what I know about antihistamines and that local honey is better for people because it contains the same histamines, I guess, or antihistamines as local vegetation. I think if people had are involved in community gardens, the beekeeping close to or nearby the community gardens would be a particular interest to them. So I think on all counts, on several counts, that's a really good idea. But I do think giving a single neighbor the veto power would pretty much eliminate beekeeping in our city. As far as the bringing everything to council, I would almost rather see an appeals process by a resident if they are worried about a neighbor applying for a license. I think staff could make that determination as they are now, but if there was an appropriate or a standard appeal process for the residents to bring that forward, I don't know how far that would go, but certainly I'd rather see it on appeal than through just on a regular basis. And I agree with Mr. Rogers, Matt Rogers, that this is a land use issue, and it has a lot to do with zoning. And I believe our community has a lot of zoning, and that we should probably be inclusive of the things that we are talking to the community about: livable gardens, sustainable gardens, all kind of things. So anyway, I think we're on a good direction here, and I hope we can continue and make sense out of this whole thing.
Alderman Ravel?
I don't know if Alderman Miller included this in his thinking about sort of a permit process, but that would presumably include some kind of notice to neighbors so that neighbors would have an opportunity to weigh in as part of the permit approval process. If we're sending it back to staff and we're going to have more chance to get more information, I'd be interested in our contacting our current beekeepers to get their input as well. I don't know if they know that we're talking about that tonight. But I also very much like to see the community continuing to move ahead with being a community that supports pollinators and provides the habitat that they need.
Thank you very much. I'll weigh in here for a minute. I had a question, Mr. Ford, about why we were changing language from shall to must. What's the legal reason for that?
It's just following the federal sort of guidelines in terms of contract drafting. Shall is sort of an obsolete term, so it's must or must not is the recommended sort of language to be used going forward, and you'll be seeing that in other ordinances that are drafted or resolutions that are drafted in front of you.
Okay. I'm a big fan of bees, not of wasps. I spend a lot of time in the summer explaining to people what the difference is. And wasps are generally aggressive, bees are not. My concern is that, I've got several concerns, but one of them is if we start putting all the apiaries in the same location, there is something in the ordinance that says there shall be no more than 8 per ward. So we'd have to think about if we're going to move them, where they're going to go, and if they are, if we want to change that that part so they will be in compliance. I'd like to hear from Melissa. I'd like to hear from the lady from Indiana.
Listen to.
No, not right now, but I'd like to find out a little bit more about. I'm assuming that people who have bees may have fruit trees, may have plants that require pollination, and that is their attraction to keeping bees. Again, if we locate all of them in one spot, they may not be getting to the place where they need to be. And I do think that as part of the annual licensing, as Alderman Revelle mentioned, that we can include a notice to neighbors and an opportunity for appeal at that time, if necessary. But my main concern, and what I'm hopeful has happened in this case, is that the neighbors can work together. And if there's a problem, that the neighbors can be responsive to their neighbors. We have situations in all of our wards all the time that can be issues that people are unhappy about, are having difficulty communicating with their neighbors. Somehow or another, these things do work out. And I just don't want to over-legislate something of this type, because I think that everyone's intention in support of the environment, in support of a good local food source, all those wonderful things that we're working toward can be amicably resolved between neighbors. But I would support that as far as the annual licensing, that there be a notification to the neighbors. And Alderman Miller. Wynn?
I didn't come on this particular issue. I came for the lake level issue, but my memory is a little fuzzy about when we passed that ordinance. So, okay, so I don't know. Alderman Holmes, were you on the council?
Yes, we did. We didn't, Alderman Nguyen. I was under the same impression. We did it for the chickens, but we didn't do it for the bees.
Okay, then, all right. So, but I think the reason why we didn't do it for the bees, as I remember it distinctly that night, was because, as Alderman Holmes will remember, we received information literally from around the world from beekeepers around the world about what beekeeping entailed and how the honeybees don't sting and are not aggressive, and that if the hive is a certain distance from a property line, that should be sufficient, that honeybees fly in a straight line. My memory's a little iffy on this. They don't fly very high, and that I think in the end, the reason why we didn't pass it was because we determined that that they were generally not a nuisance in the community, and that that actually we debated having neighbor consent, and ultimately at the time decided that that would end up having a chilling effect, and that we would end up with no beehives in Evanston. And if you remember, Alderman Holmes will remember this, when this issue first arose, it was, we suddenly found out that there were a lot of people keeping bees in Evanston.
That we didn't know about.
And didn't know about it, and that they were sharing their honey with neighbors, and no one had complained. In fact, we found out that there were a number of bee trees in Evanston that were producing honey as well. People just went in, there were trees on public property that had beehives in them, and that people in the neighborhood knew about it, and some people were actually pretty good at getting the honey out of it. So it was something that was already naturally occurring, and I will say we had, I'm going to say, 8 or 9 months of debate and information about this. And ultimately, it was, the amount of information that we received indicated to us that overwhelmingly bees were better better to have in the community than not to have. And that was 10 years ago, before the bee collapse that's now happened has happened. So I agree with that. Having some community garden bee hiving would be great, but I also think that a lot of the things that are being discussed were discussed.
Except I don't remember a life and death situation in terms of the allergic reaction. We didn't discuss that, and that I was trying to remember, and nobody else sitting up here was on the council at the time but me when we had this discussion before it, and I really and truly thought that we had put in notification for the neighbors and things, but we hadn't, and I looked back and found that we hadn't done that.
I do remember limiting it to 8 per ward.
Yeah, I remember that too.
And I thought we had done notification as well.
I did too.
Yeah.
I just don't know why it didn't get in there.
But there was an enormous amount of bee information that came to us. I mean, I had emails from Australia, from Great Britain, all over Europe.
Thanks, Alderman Nguyen. Was somebody, Alderman Miller.
I don't want to just close off discussion, but I want to make a formal reference if anyone else, does anyone else want to discuss this?
Well, I guess what I would say is that, and thank you, Alderman Nguyen, for chiming in. I think that's really helpful. And thank you, Alderman Holmes, for both of you having good memories about this. While I would support the notification to neighbors, I don't want that to be an automatic approval or disapproval. I think notification is enough. I just, as Mr. Rogers pointed out, in his case, with 80 neighbors, that would just discourage any kind of beekeeping, I think, anywhere in Evanston. And so, Alderman Miller.
I agree with the notification process, but if we want to do what Alderman Tennant said in regards to having an appeal process in that regard, maybe do a formal reference in that regard and strike the portion regarding called the single resident veto. So instead of having that have notice before the permit is issued and then have an appeal process for the issuance of the permit, that'd be my formal recommendation or reference.
So did you want that to go back to staff?
Yeah, go back to staff, and then we'll bring that language back. I don't know, that needs a second if we need to vote on it, et cetera, but that would be my recommendation.
Okay, so...
I will second that, provided that we ask staff also to look at areas that the city could provide or recommend, for folk. If Mr. Rogers is driving to Wisconsin and he didn't mention the amount of money, but he's spending money to do that. I just don't think that is fair either. And if we did have spaces in the community that could be used, I just think that would be the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm. So that was Mr. Silverthorne who was driving.
Silverthorne, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Then I'll amend my recommendation to include Alderman Holmes' recommendation that we examine areas of the city but for potential clustering. Call it that.
So just to be
clustering, how about that?
So to be clear, for next month, you just want to see a revised sort of ordinance looking at striking the veto, having some sort of notice and appeal process, and then also providing information on areas in the city of Evanston where beekeeping, public places where beekeeping can take place, correct? Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Would that be the permit? Now, you also mentioned something, Alderman Miller, I thought, about a permit process.
It's kind of whether you're being prospective or reactive, and the appeals process is fine with me. They kind of serve the same purpose, so that's fine with me.
Right. Okay. All right, so all of those in favor of sending this back to staff for revisions, say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Okay, is anybody opposed? Okay.
And can we have it back on the agenda for next month?
Sure. Is that enough time?
We'll try to make it for that time.
Yeah, because it will be the bee season. I mean, it will be that season. Has to be next month.
That time.
Okay, thank you, Henry.
Yeah.
Okay, and now we're moving on. We've got two items for discussion. HH3 is the Dog Beach and Lakefront Issues presentation. We have John Shabika here. We are delighted to have him with us tonight, the expert on all the things lakefront.
And the bearer of bad news.
Could you give us a little bit about your background and what you do?
Yeah, I'm John Shabika, the company name Shabika & Associates. We're a 38-year-old company doing coastal science, coastal engineering. I'm happy to report that I'm not the engineer. I'm the translator for the engineers. So I'm the one that wins the coin toss and gets to do the public meetings. Usually when the engineers come up, they use a lot of anachronisms and everything like that, and there's usually a lot of questions. This is the 9th time I've done a lake level talk so far this season. So this is not the first time everybody in the community is kind of raising their hands and going, what happened to the lakefront? And unfortunately, municipalities do not look at their lakefronts when they're not having issues. It's similar. Our beach analogy is it's kind of like a roof. Nobody cares about the roof until it leaks. The same way with the lakefront. Nobody cared about the lakefront 3 years ago when we all had big, glorious, fabulous beaches. So I'm teaching background, so if anybody has any questions or I say anything that you have no clue about, please feel free to cut me off. And, oh, should I use this or that?
No.
Oh, the mouse? Uh-oh. Ha-ha. How many people were here in 1986? Okay, so 1986 is the reference point that we use. Does this have a laser on it? Nope.
Yes, it does.
Oh, it does?
It just lit up.
No? Okay, well, it's kind of hard to see here on the yellow. This is, going back to 1986, we've gone through 2 high lake level cycles, and then 1 star that you see on the right side of that screen, which represented the low lake level. And between those 2 differences, you have almost a 6-foot difference. So if you remember 1986, and you remember 1997, which was the last cycle, those were our 2 high lake levels. Now, the only reason we've had this glorified dog beach for so long that everybody loves...
I need you to come to the microphone.
Oh, sorry.
Director.
Sorry. Well, here, then I'm going to turn myself sideways. So if you kind of look on that chart from the center over, you'll see a very long, prolonged period of low lake levels. Now, the reason I say long and prolonged is Lake Michigan, anywhere between about 16 and 20 years, we have gone through this very cyclical low to high cycle within this very narrow range. This is not anything that's unique to what we've been seeing.
Director.
So what we are now is we went through a longer low lake level cycle than we ever anticipated. Oh, just real. Haha. Oh yeah. I can't even see that. No worries. Okay, I'm good. I'll talk loud. So, when we hit January 2013, we set the all-time recorded record low lake level.
Works for me.
And this is what we dealt with. So, we experienced prolonged low lake levels, extreme storm events at low lake levels. I don't know if anybody remembers that, because what it did was bring in sand. Anybody remember Hurricane Sandy? What it did to the East Coast? Does anybody remember what it did here? We had almost record-setting waves that slugged so much deep water sand up on shore, it helped grow the beaches. We had large sand accumulation around structures, and then we had very mild winters. This is one of my favorite pictures from 2013. This is Winnetka's municipal boat launch. You think they were going to open the boat launch that season? That's the ramp on the right. That's supposed to drop into 7 feet of water. Here was your dog beach. So that was February 3rd, 2013. Now here's the critical thing. Look at the elevation of the beach. 576.1. That's above sea level. And the other thing I want you to take a look at is this nice, long, gentle, sloping beach. And the reason that's important is, how does the lake level affect the size of a sandy beach? Well, when we measured the dog beach on that day, that beach slope was a 1 on 65-foot slope. So what that means is, for every 1 foot of elevation change, we had 65 feet of horizontal beach. Everybody can picture that now, right? So, April 2nd, 2013, Google Earth, you had 300 feet of sandy beach right here. Everybody remembers that, right? That was the best part. Okay. This is one of my, I think a picture speaks 1,000 words. This is my favorite picture regarding that. So, here is January 1st of 2013, all-time record low lake level. Everybody remember the winter of 2012? Okay, how about 1 year later? We went from almost 0 ice coverage on Lake Michigan to 97% ice coverage. We didn't have winter evaporation of lake levels. See this nice big spike here? That represents a 2-foot increase in lake levels. Okay, then we have a nice summer. We see a little summer seasonal evaporation, which we typically see. Then what happens? We come into another winter. of intense ice coverage. Now remember, each one of these feet, each one of these lines represents a foot. Here's where we are today. Throw on top of that the storms that we've had in the last 2 years. Everybody remember October 31st of 2014? 23-foot recorded waves in Lake Michigan. The only reason it didn't make national news, it was in the off season, nobody was killed, and there were no boats in the water. If that had happened around July 4th with the damage we saw within harbors, it would have made national news. We had a marine contractor's barge that was 300 feet long sink at Navy Pier. So the surprisingly swift rebound in water levels in the upper Great Lakes broke records across the region. The rise in water levels on Lake Michigan from the monthly low in January 2013 to 2016 was a remarkable 4.7 feet. Okay, think of 4.7 feet in vertical change. Remember what I said to you about slopes? So today, the lake water level is at 580. Now, I hate to say it, we're still 1.5 feet below what the Army Corps of Engineers defines as a high water level. So, here's where we were in 2013. Here's where the Army Corps of Engineers predicted the lake level would go. The star is actually where we are today. We're actually exceeding the Army Corps of Engineers estimates for increase in lake levels. So how did that affect the dog beach? So here's the dog beach from yesterday. Remember that 1 on 65 slope? You take into account 4.7 feet in lake level rise, you automatically lost 292.5 feet of beach. That's solely based on elevation. That does not take into account the storms we've been seeing. Has anybody been down to the lake lately? Yeah, we have not had a kind spring. So, unfortunately, the beaches are going to continue to be smaller. The nearshore bathymetry will be difficult to predict this season as the sandbars are migrating at a much faster rate. Bathymetry is, topography is what happens above water, bathymetry is what happens below water. Average waves will feel larger as they're depth limited and will break closer to shore. What that means is a wave, it can only get as high as the depth of the water that it's in. The deeper the water is near shore, the bigger the wave is going to get. So even on what we would define as a calm day, will still be a relatively large wave. And then the risk for large waves and rip currents will be higher given the increased water level. And this is especially true around steel groins. And I hate to say that because, and it's kind of hard to see in this picture. This is a rip current at the end of a steel groin in Evanston. What is the wave conditions? Almost zero. And we're seeing rip currents. Most of my meetings so far this season have been with lifeguards to kind of explain to them what's happening around the lake. Because one of the things that they're going to see at your public beaches this season is it's going to be deeper near shore, and that's only based on lake levels and where the waves are breaking. Well, here's the funny thing with dogs. Dogs don't panic in water. People panic. When a dog is stuck in a rip current, a dog just kind of swims until it gets back to shore. What happens is a person swimming in a rip current gets in a rip current and panics because they think they're helpless. And then they swim against the current and they drown, which if they realize all they have to do is float, and they float right around the backside of a rip current. And we have a it's a very high tech, very complicated way of illustrating that to people, and that's we throw grapefruits in the water. Grapefruits are neutrally buoyant. They float about an inch below the surface. So if you ever have a nice day or you want to do a scientific experiment with kids, go get a case of grapefruits, throw them in the water at a groin, and you'll be amazed at how quickly they'll be drawn out around the groin and drawn back on the south side. So, unfortunately, going back, the climatologists are predicting continued higher Lake Michigan water levels and more extreme storms this season. We are also starting to experience the long-term effects of lake bed downcutting from the low lake levels. What that means is when the lake was so low, waves were breaking in an area along the lakeshore that waves never broke on before, which is further offshore. Everybody noticed that the lake is a nice chalky color this time of year. It's not that blue that it normally is. All of that chalky color is eroded lake bed clay. So when we go back to a high lake level, we will experience much higher and much more severe erosion at that lake level. We expect to see damage to public and private lakefront property, including existing infrastructure and in greater potential for submerged hazards. These are piles right next to Lighthouse Beach that are on private property. They were not a navigational concern at low lake levels. That is them today. Those piles are 6 feet high. You only see the top 1 foot of those piles. Here's a 120-foot long concrete pier that at one point the neighbor to the south had a nice sandy beach. What is this beach comprised of right now? It's mostly cobble. That's going to be one of the biggest challenges also with this higher lake level, is we're seeing a lot more aggressive movement of sand along the lakefront. So, and this is where I bring the bad news. From the standpoint of options, I've heard people say, what can we do right now? What can we make modifications to regarding the lakefront? Like I said earlier, nobody ever looks at the lakefront from a planning of being proactive. And it's not to say that the city hasn't been proactive, it's just we never expected it to happen this quickly. So from a state and federal regulation standpoint, anything we do along the lakefront goes through 7 state and federal agencies. That's the Army Corps of Engineers, the Department of Natural Resources, the Illinois EPA, Illinois Historic Preservation, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, Illinois Coastal Zone Management, and potentially FEMA or Homeland Security. Needless to say, they're not all fast and efficient. And yeah, I'm saying that on a public record. They require permits for anything, including new structures, simply just placing sand, or even maintenance of existing structures. The regulatory agencies, too, are also overwhelmed with shore protection permits. Lakefront permitting right now may take between 8 and 18 months for issuance. And that, like I said, that includes simply if you just wanted to place sand. And in conclusion, we need to recognize that Lake Michigan is a dynamic environment. The only reason I'm here is because to be active and educate the community on the changing lakefront conditions and risks to users this season. Anticipate damage to existing shore protection structures. And the reason I say especially revetments, Evanston, really from a public lakefront standpoint, only has 2 structures. You have steel groins or you have revetments protecting parks. We don't worry about the steel groins only because the steel groins are kind of excessive in size and they've always held an immense amount of sand. And I brought 1997 pictures to kind of show you that. The reason we say revetments are at risk is because, once again, with the higher lake level and the storms, we're going to see more erosion and damage at the toe of those revetments, where those revetments are going to potentially need to be rebuilt or maintained at a higher rate. Private property also has experienced the same impact and tougher regulations every year. The reason I say tougher regulations is municipalities, because you're the benefit of the public, usually get a little different permitting. Leniability maybe, and private property is held to a much higher standard. And does anybody have any questions? And I also brought, this is what that basin looked like in 1997. So this is still not the high lake level, but this is what we would expect those conditions to be like potentially before the end of the year. And I can take any questions from the alderman or the audience if anybody has any.
I think we've got 1 question from the audience, and if there's 2 questions from the audience. 3 questions from the audience. Barbara, could you come up to the microphone?
Okay.
Anyone who has questions, so we can get it on TV and recorded. Your name?
Barbara Janes. What would happen if you took out all the breakwaters?
All the breakwaters are all the structures. So just, here, I'm going to use this. So just this structure or this structure and the revetment. There's 2 types of shore protection: shore perpendicular or shore parallel.
All of them, except possibly at the boat launch.
Okay.
But everything else.
We would be similar to the state of Michigan in that we would see potentially up to 1 foot to 2 feet per year of land erosion if we took out all the structures. Does anybody here's a question too. I'm pretty sure nobody here was here back then, but how old do you think some of those structures are? When did Evanston start engineering their lakefront?
Oh, I would guess.
About 1930. There's Evanston's lakefront in 1930 with over 90 wood pile crib groins that held beaches. There's 1930. You look at all the lakefront. There's the lighthouse at Lighthouse Beach. So this is not a recent challenge. This is a challenge we've been dealing with since lakefront property started to become valuable, is when people started protecting it. And if we took out all the structures, we would have no lakefront and a significantly eroding lakefront in a very short period of time.
Okay.
And just real quick on one more thing, the Department of Natural Resources 2 years ago placed close to $80,000 of sand at Illinois Beach State Park, which is the last section of native shoreline in Illinois. That was $80,000 worth of sand that stayed for less than 24 hours.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Can we have the next question?
Carl, I think you're...
Yes. Just your name, please.
My name is Ray Janicek, and I was wondering, is a revetment the rocks along the shore? Is that what that's called?
That's what it calls.
Perfect question. So a revetment, there are multiple different types of ways to protect property. The entire city of Chicago is protected by a steel seawall. That's, everybody remembers around Lakeshore Drive, when you get the big waves, they splash and break beautifully and then flood Lakeshore Drive. We have a stone revetment, and the purpose of those types of structures, or something like a concrete seawall, the purpose of those are basically to be that hard line in the sand, sorry for the pun. It's to just stop erosion. It's not to create access. It's not to create a beach. It's not to provide any type of coastal habitat. Any structure that's perpendicular to the shoreline is designed to help hold sand. And the reason that there's difference in that is, in Illinois, the primary direction of sand movement in what we call the littoral system is north to south, and that's based on which direction we see the biggest storm waves from. So when you build a structure, and in this case you build a structure that's 600 feet long, what's it going to do over time is it's going to do nothing but fill in with sand until it's completely full. And if we go back to the 2012 Google Earth, you could see that that system was completely full. And then now that system is holding whatever it can. Now, when we do private property breakwaters, and there's been a lot of negative fears, even Evanston explored doing a lakefront ordinance a few years ago against private property shore protection like that. The difference is now, from a permitting standpoint, one, these systems would never be built this big. This is not something the Department of Natural Resources would ever want to see, a beach this big. And as we've seen at low lake levels, it makes almost too big a beach. When we do these on private property, the boundary for private property is 125 feet offshore. So you take this structure, which is 600 feet, we're going 125 feet, which, you know, considering this is 300 feet long, we might be back here for private property. And then what was required now by the state and federal regulators is any system we build has to be filled with sand to create that immediate equilibrium. So when we look at budgeting for some of these projects, in some cases the sand budget might be higher than the other infrastructure budgets.
Carl?
Carl Bova. I was around in 1985 and worked on the Chicago Shoreline Project, and it's still going on today. A couple of things of note. Back in 85, 86, then Parks and Rec manager Doug Gaynor had some meetings with respect to the rising lake levels at that point, and there's a revetment section just south of downtown that's several hundred feet long, I'm not sure exactly. But a concern is raised with respect to revetments if one is wishing to examine raising the revetment walls to protect against the wave action and the erosion. The problem is that as soon as the lake level goes down, you no longer can see the lake. And so a recommendation was made in the 80s there that I believe that we're in pretty good shape, that we have some extra stone that was moved off of the revetment and placed next to it so that in the event that we have an opportunity to require the raising of the revetments, that the material is present. I believe that's the case. I'm not 100% sure. So that is a very important aspect of this as well. Just remember, what goes up also must be coming down. And that leads me to the next question for John, and that is the expected cycle for it to come up and then go back down. Are we talking about a year, 2 years, 3 years? What's the duration? And the other thing that people don't realize as well is that on an annual basis, and I think one of John's slides kind of showed this, is that on a monthly level, the wintertime generally you have lesser lake levels, water goes back up, and then it comes back. So there's an annual cycle of up and down, which may add to the problem. Thanks.
Thank you.
One of the groups I spoke to yesterday was a school group, and I said, if any of you want to have a great job, go be a climatologist, because climatologists are only accurate 3% of the time. Can you imagine having a job? So from the standpoint of the question on, yes, we see seasonal cycles. In the summer, we see evaporation. In the winter, we see evaporation. In the spring, we see precipitation. And sometimes in the falls, we get precipitation. And that's what helps that seasonal. I wish there was a better predictor for what we've seen. What we know is what our history has been. And our history says between 16 and 20 years, we've seen these low and high. What we've also noted is between those cycles, we've had prolonged lows, and we've seen the highs come faster than we ever anticipated. So from the standpoint of trying to plan, the hardest part is when we look at the permitting, the cost, and the need, it really comes down to one of those typically isn't there when you need it. At the low lake level, like I said, everybody was enjoying the big beach, and it would seem silly to spend money to fix something that wasn't broken. Now, one of the questions too that came up was regarding revetments. If it came down to today as a coastal best management practice, would I want to make that revetment just bigger? And my answer would probably be no. And here's why. This goes back to that little discussion about what we've seen from a lake bed downcutting, and picture this as an Evanston shoreline. So this is just a revetment. With the low lake levels, we saw typically sand build up there. As we had this lake bed erosion, because waves were breaking not against the rocks, which is why those revetments were installed, we had waves breaking offshore. Now you go to slide 3, and what we're seeing is, in some cases where we've seen revetments where it was shallow in front of those revetments, we're now seeing areas in front of those revetments where it's potentially 9 to 15 feet deep. So at some point, we could continue to add rock to that revetment almost every day, and that revetment may continue to simply slide into the lake. So the options are to either build a more robust revetment or potentially put something smaller offshore for the purpose of simply tripping those waves before they get to shore. If anybody, and I should have brought a picture of this, but I didn't, something that the Department of Natural Resources did with Presque Isle State Park. They have submerged what they call living breakwaters or submerged breakwaters. There is a double-edged sword to them. It is putting a structure offshore that has the potential to become a navigational hazard. So there is some kind of an acceptance that people need to understand that it comes down to a balance. And really, when we look at working with a municipality from the standpoint of their lakefront, one of the best positions that you are in right now is you're not really experiencing damage. We have some deflating revetments, we have a smaller beach, and we've lost the dog beach. You don't have buildings falling in. We're not closing the beaches this season. This is literally, what do we need to do from a planning standpoint to make the beach that you want to use more sustainable? That's a nice position than some of the other municipalities I've been working with. Yeah.
Need to move along. We've got another big issue.
Speaking about that underwater thing, one of the guys from the Dog Beach said that's what they do in Michigan. Does that, in fact, bring sand in? That was that was the impression that he left us.
It doesn't bring sand in, it breaks wave energy so it doesn't take sand. And as my experience in these other meetings, we could talk about this until midnight. I've left the presentation, so if anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out to me.
Okay. I wanted to make sure that that the committee members had a chance to ask questions too. Does anyone have any questions for John? This has been amazing. I mean, I think at the Dog Beach meeting on Saturday, Alderman Nguyen and I were really surprised because people were saying, why didn't you people know about this? It's your fault. You just haven't been paying attention. And why didn't we know about it? It sounds like lots of people didn't know about it.
Well, the last time I spoke in front of the aldermen, it was at low lake levels, working with a private homeowner to install shore protection for a shoreline that was even being damaged at a low lake level. We're on their 18th month of still trying to permit this project. They're still having damage, and it's one of those things that from the standpoint of process, it's not going to get any easier, which is one reason why we think the education component is so important.
Right. Alderman Miller has a question.
Mr. Shabik, I appreciate the presentation. It was great. I also appreciate the vocabulary lesson. Bathymetry, that's a good word I've heard before.
There's a test afterwards.
I appreciate that. Don't ask me to spell it. I actually don't have a question for you, and I don't know if anyone else has a question. I actually want to talk to Mr. Hemingway for a second as well, if that's okay. Because this is a problem we're also facing. It's not just at Dog Beach. We're having, like, for example, at our small boat launch beach as well. And there's some use problems where, for example, where we used to have a bathing area or that sort, they're starting to move into the boat launch area. So I don't think this is just a Dog Beach problem. I think it's we have to evaluate the use of the beaches as a whole. And I also think that just addressing the Dog Beach problem will probably push other problems elsewhere. So can you talk about what you're seeing in the other beaches and what we're thinking about in that regards?
Madam Chair, Madam Chair and council members. Alderman Miller, you're absolutely correct. I mean, all of our beaches are shrinking. The water isn't just rising in at one particular area. So we are currently facing a reduced beach front throughout the entire lakefront. And so we are closely examining each and every beach. Right now, it looks like, if the water levels go to the Army Corps Engineers projections, we'll have swimming beaches this summer. But they will be reduced from the size they were last year, and we're aware of it. We are now monitoring the situation as closely as possible and trying to work on some long-term strategies to try to address it. But, as each of you are aware, those things, cost quite a bit of money, as was just shared with this committee and the public today.
So you would say we're having a similar problem on basically all of our beaches?
All our lakefront beaches are smaller today than they were last year. That is correct.
And as far as, call it as severe a problem as we're having at Dog Beach, are we seeing a severe problem in terms of like we lost, 600 square feet or whatever of the Dog Beach? Are we seeing similar problems in any other beaches? It's all relative.
So we haven't lost any other beach, but I'll tell you right now, we're very concerned about Greenwood. We're as of today, we haven't lost it, but it's significantly reduced. So, it's really going to be up to Mother Nature to determine what happens there.
Thanks.
Well, that's sobering. Okay, just last question from the audience. And we've got to move on to another issue that's going to take time. So.
It isn't really a question, but it's an observation. My name is Ray Janicek.
Yeah, just pull the mic down.
Okay.
There you go.
The sailing beach, I've looked at it, and the wave has been crashing underneath the boat racks. And so it would look as though they may need to be moved farther up, but I'm not really even sure. I just happen to know that because I have boat racks there. So.
And if I may, Madam Chair, Mr. Hemingway, I would just, if we're facing these sort of problems of an enlarged lake, if you can come back and report to efforts to address it at some point, that would be the request.
Okay, not a problem, Alderman. Just to the constituents' concern, we are now prepping all the beaches for the Memorial Day weekend opening, and as far as those boat docks, those will be moved and placed in different locations. Okay.
Thank you. And for those, I think I forwarded you Ray Dorner's comments about questions that were raised for the Dog Beach meeting, and those will be posted on the city's Dog Beach website for the public to review as well, and we'll be taking a look at that as staff, and yeah, boy. Okay, so thank you, Mr. Shabika, for coming.
So will that be back on the agenda next month? Because I imagine that
we need to get a report back from staff, and we'll have it as a continuing item on the agenda. We are going to try to answer all the questions from the Dog Beach meeting. We weren't prepared to be able to do that on Saturday. And again, I want to thank Mr. Shabika. He came at almost no notice at all, and I very much appreciate that. Okay, we're going to move on to a discussion of the food truck ordinance. It's HH4. Okay, so do we have staff here that's going to talk about that? Yvonne, did you want to address it? Legal. Oh, okay. Henry, are you going to lead us through this?
I can, yes.
Okay. Oh, was Marty?
Address it?
Marty Lyons?
Yeah, but I can address any.
Okay. Are you going to be staff on the food truck ordinance? Were you going to walk us through that?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, I had not planned to walk everyone through the ordinance. I will point out that at the end of the ordinance, there was, at the end of the staff report, there was a listing of options. I think the ordinance itself was, the staff report, we packed quite a bit in about 3 pages of options, and we broke those down into things that legally we can't do, things we can't do right away, and items that we would like to go forward even while we're waiting for a resolution of the court case. We could be doing several steps that could be taken right now while waiting to hear the court timing. Thank you very much. That'll help me out.
Marty, one of the things that it would be helpful for me to know is, and please correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding is that we send out an RFP for food service operations at the lakefront concessions,
That is correct.
and that normally we get back one response.
That's been our history, and we just did that recently, so that's been set for the coming year.
Okay.
But that was a part of a 3-year deal, and we will be actually going back out for, sorry, I contradicted. It was a 3-year deal. We would be going back out next year.
Okay, and it's also my understanding, is this a local family who is running this?
It is a local presence that, but I do not know whether it's family or.
I'd like information from staff about how they would see the potential impact of food trucks down at the beach to be in competition with our concession, and how that might work out. I would hate to lose our concessions. And my understanding is that with so little interest, that must mean that there's not a lot of money being made. So I would like to know from staff what the impact of having food trucks on the lake would be on the revenues that our concessioner is generating.
And Madam Chair, I think you've highlighted it in your question. Yes, that would be an issue, and we could respond and then take council direction on whether or not to recognize that and include it in our next year's process for concession. We certainly didn't envision when we rehabbed the concession area that it could be taken over by food trucks. And that was about 5 years ago when it was redesigned. So things do change. I think we would respond to you, though, more quickly with the food truck analysis to say what we know. And it was referenced briefly that Chicago does have the food trucks in a lot of places, and they do compete with their not just beach, but with other concessions. So we know that that would be the case, just from what our neighbor to the south. We'll follow up in writing.
Okay. Does anyone else? I was contacted, and I believe some of the rest of you may have been, by one of the local restaurant operators who had concerns, and I want to make sure that those concerns are in the record. They have to do with the license fee and the process. And how Type 2 restaurants need to go through a special use permitting process, and why out-of-town fast food trucks might be exempt. Again, these are not my questions. These are questions that came to us at the committee. The fees charged to them, that they should be similar to what are charged to local businesses. Food trucks operating in SSAs. Food establishments, brick and mortar, already pay into the SSA. Would food trucks pay into them? And then patio permits, just exhaust and generation and ventilation, fire suppression, idling, basic disturbances. So I just would like us to make sure that we address these concerns. My concern is also that I believe that there is a general feeling that existing business owners feel very reluctant to stand up at a committee and feel like they're opposing something that might be very popular, and don't wish to generate negative feedback that might reflect on their businesses. So I'm taking that very seriously, and I'm sympathetic to that position. I don't know who was first, Alderman Holmes or Braithwaite.
I think Braithwaite.
Okay, go ahead. Go ahead.
It's just a request that I received the same memo, and hopefully you can forward it along to staff. I didn't see if staff was copied. I know you copied the committee.
Okay.
Great.
Okay, the young lady who made a statement earlier about the food trucks, and in particular for first night, and the possibility of no other fees. And I'm thinking that I understand that it's a small business and all that, but there are still costs that have to be covered, from cities that the city staff's administration of it, and some of the same issues that was raised in the memo that maybe we hadn't paid close enough attention to. So I think that one of the recommendation from the staff about the fee structure, I think that is something we need to look at very, very carefully, not trying to overcharge anyone or anything, but I think that there has to be fees to cover costs. It's as simple as that, because you just can't come in to a community where other restaurants, brick and mortar, whatever, are paying fair share, and somebody has to help cover those costs. So if they're going to come in, take business, then the fees have to match that.
I'm curious, Martha. My memory was that at first night there were a number of food trucks that didn't show up for. Was that the case, or?
There were some.
Do we know why that was?
One had to do with staffing. They couldn't get the staff to be there. And the ones that were there, they did sell out of their things, so they left. But in order to get the ones that did show up, there were lots and lots and lots of requests to try to get food there because it's been something that the patrons of First Night have asked for. Certainly they go to the restaurants for dinner, but then, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, they want something a little quick, and so they wanted something right there around Raymond Park. So it was indicated to us that it was a little cost prohibitive to come in for that event, and so we didn't have a lot of response to our request to have it.
Okay, thanks. And any other comments from
Maybe I was going to say maybe it's the time of the year as well, because in the summer, like for the concerts in the parks and everything, even in the Fifth Ward, we've been able to get food trucks to come over to our park for our concerts. So we've had food trucks, and they've typically sold out because people do want to, to purchase food. And I know that down at Elks, I think it's Elks Park with Alderman Rainey, they have gobs of them. We've had I think we've had 3, maybe 4 at the most at one time. But,
No doubt New Year's Eve.
Yeah, it's maybe
Madam
that's
Chair?
part of the issue.
Yes.
I would just point out we definitely went between brevity and we heard a lot from the businesses. I think this has been coalesced quite a bit. We know that we're going to have to license for a period of time, for instance, and regulate for a period of time, just like we do brick and mortar. And you'll have a food truck say, well, you're charging me much more. I'm only in town 10 days out of the whole year, but I have to pay the whole license fee. I think that's going to be a discussion that we'll want to have because they're avoiding a lot of brick and mortar costs. So, there's, I heard the statement about what's fair, and I think it is going to be a situationally fair analysis where we point out that you'll have to incur the cost because you're saving in other places. And
they're not paying property tax.
And they're not paying property tax. So that's not something we're going to come out with overnight. We definitely want to bring those forward, but time is a wasting. We have events that we would like to have benefit. I also think of why we do certain things in our business districts where we don't necessarily want to have tents lining up and down because it blocks the businesses and you can no longer see them. So as we analyze where we'll put food trucks, we don't want a food truck blocking the view or the access to businesses in a given area. And that's why we've kind of highlighted some of the areas not right in front of similar businesses. So one of the things that as far as what we're looking for also though is direction. May we begin working on the next steps and bring back regulations for a first look to the Human Services Committee.
I don't see why not. Does anyone object to that? Yeah, sure.
We will get started.
Yeah, okay. Is that all you need from us tonight on this?
Yeah, it was really if you recall when it was referred, the action steps were meet with the businesses, get everything together, and then come back to you and get direction. So I believe we've done that.
Okay. The food trucks are very popular, and that's wonderful. And now, will that come back to Human Services?
Yes.
Okay, great. When?
I believe we could get started at the next month. Again, we won't do everything at once, but if there's something that, for instance, is situational to special events for summer, then we're going to try and go after that initially. I know that I would want to talk with the health director as quickly as possible about what we can and cannot do from a regulatory aspect, and then talk with law about setting up fees and licensing.
Okay. Yes, well, you need to sign in and
I apologize for not doing that. My name's Jacob Hubert. I'm an attorney. I represent the owners of the Beavers Coffee and Donuts food truck. One of those owners was going to be here to speak during public comment, but he became sick and couldn't make it, so he emailed me something he'd like me to share. First of all, the owners greatly appreciate this effort to potentially open up the market here in Evanston. There was one proposal in the memorandum that was in the packet that we had a concern about, and that pertains to the recommendation for air curtains or air screens. And our position is that they don't actually serve any more purpose than regular screens, but they actually impose a much higher cost. And Chicago does not require those air screens. And so that would mean that any food truck that wants to do business in Evanston would have to invest in this expensive special air screen that they don't need to use anywhere else. So we would just ask that when these regulations are being formulated and the committee's considering them, that it reconsider whether air screens are really necessary or whether the ordinary screens used in Chicago and elsewhere would suffice.
Okay, thank
That's
you very
all.
much. And could I just get you to sign in here? Of course. So, okay, we're going to move on. There are items for communication. There's the General and Emergency Assistance Quarterly Report. Does anyone have any questions or comments on that? Alderman Miller is going to comment, okay?
Yvonne, real quick. So are we doing utilities assistance anymore? It doesn't look like, I mean, we just have January listed for in the report, but are we seeing it?
We are assisting, Yvonne Thomas Smith, Health Director. We are assisting with water shutoff notifications, and we refer families that have come to us for NICOR to community organizations that have the NICOR sharing program. And then for ComEd, we work with some of our faith-based community and other nonprofits to do wraparound services. So our commitment to utilities really is around water.
Thanks.
Did that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, if there's no other business to come before the committee, is there a motion to adjourn? So moved. Okay, second. Wow. Okay, great. Thank you all very much. We learned a lot tonight, I think.